You are listening to the Under the Rug podcast with Nalini Tranquim.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Under the Rug. I am your host, Nalini Tranquim. Grief is something we all face. But what happens when it comes in ways that we never expected? Losing a loved one is hard, but losing them suddenly, without warning, can shake everything we thought we knew about life, faith, and even God himself. In our last episode, resilience coach Suzie Botross shared a deeply personal perspective on navigating grief. Well, today we continue the conversation, but from a different lens. David Broussard has walked through both anticipated and sudden loss in the most profound way. And we now have the opportunity to hear how his journey has shaped his faith, his everyday life, and his calling. After losing his father in a way he could prepare for, he was blindsided by the unexpected passing of his mother, an event that completely altered his trust in the world around him. In today's episode, we'll talk about the raw reality of grief, the body's response to deep loss, and how David found his faith not shattered, but strengthened through it all. Whether you've lost someone close to you or you're walking with someone through their own grief, this conversation will speak to your soul. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks. That's a heck of an introduction.
Oh, it's so good to have you with us. Can we start off by introducing you to our listeners? Tell us a little bit about your work with Impact France and your personal mission.
Sure. Yeah, so I came to Christ in France in 1994, and upon returning to the United States, discovered that most people had no idea what God was doing in that country, and thought God had left France. And in fact, it was quite the opposite for me. It was revival left and right for me. And the churches I was involved with had a youth group of, 50, 60 people. I mean, it was intense. And so after my wife and I got married, who came to Christ a year after I did in the same church in France, we were in France again in 2004. And the Lord really put it on my heart, and almost like an architect kind of unveiled these plans to start an organization that would mobilize prayer for and mobilize support for native French ministries. So a lot of people knew a missionary to France, but nobody knew a French pastor, a French ministry, parachurch ministry. Nobody really knew kind of that core element at the time. It has since changed, praise the Lord. But at the time, there was a lot of division between the French church and kind of missionaries. Depend, I guess, on the denomination, but generally speaking, I think that they weren't mixing too well. Friendly, but not really collaborating, working together. So the need for a voice for these ministries that were doing amazing work within all the French, nation. I just felt like that that was my family anyway. So I very much personally took that word from the Lord and said, yeah, let's go. So we started effectively ministry operations in the beginning of 2007, and still going, still growing.
Wow.
Amazing to see. I just look back and I think, what happened? We've been able to support, I think we're close to 16 million now into France. And I mean, hundreds and hundreds of projects, well, probably 200 projects. It's been God's favor, God's blessing. It is not because Dave Broussard is some amazing guy. I always tell people, I say, I happen to be the guy God chose to start it. I also do, I do primarily, in fact, do grant consulting. So I work for primarily with private foundations, nonprofits, understanding what grants look like in that space. And my personal passion is what I call godly resource discovery. So some people like to call it fundraising. I don't like that because it puts the focus on funds, money, and it also is our efforts raising it. That is not how God works. God has prepared good works for us to walk in. And I also have seen, not just believe, but I've seen how he supports financially at each step. Sometimes miraculously, sometimes well, probably all miraculously if you look at it as the act of God, but sometimes more obviously miraculous and sometimes less so, but always his provision. So we seek his provision, and it can be money, it can be other things too. So his resources, and we're discovering them. We're on that journey to discover them. We don't have to strive. We don't have to fight. We don't have to kick. We pray, we intercede. There is a battle to be won in the heavenlies, but it's not what the world teaches us fundraising is. And there's so much of that the church has passively and sometimes actively, but mostly passively just accepted as this is how you do things when you want to get money for your ministry. Our whole body, mind, what we see, the gateway to the soul with the eyes, everything we're exposed to is close to 100% how the world sees money, how the world teaches us to believe what money does, should be used, and what our place in it is in it. And it's all wrong. I mean, the short answer is it's wrong. It's not how God treats money. It's not how God wants us to interact with money. The only thing Jesus spoke about more of than money was the kingdom of God. So number two place, right? Money, how we use it, our relationship with it. I think he knew, not only in those days, but also how exponentially more growth we would see in that attitude and those mentalities, that view toward money, and how impregnated our entire world would become with dollars and cents. It's quite remarkable. So that's really my passion and where I'm really leaning into in this season of my life.
I think we might have to get you back on Under the Rug to unpack that more. I can tell already I'm going to have people reaching out saying, we want to hear more about that. David, I'd love to unpack your personal story over the next segment. You've experienced two profound losses. Losing a parent is never easy, but you had time to prepare for your father's passing. How did that process of pre-grieving shape your experience of losing him?
Yeah. Well, just like you said, it was pre-grieving. There were stages, moments in time during my dad's decline that I was able to come and be with him and spend time with him and as much as I could. My father was diagnosed with Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is some is transmitted. You might have heard mad cow disease. Some is transmitted by like tainted meat. That most cases are not that. Most cases are what they call spontaneous, which means nobody knows what happens. In the United States, which has a population, 360, 70 million, there are about 300 to 400 cases diagnosed a year. So it's literally 1 in a million diagnosis. There is no cure. There's no treatment. There are no drugs to slow it down. It's pretty much palliative care. And so it presents as dementia. And my dad's my grandfather had dementia. And so in the onset, in August 2019, we thought that was what it was. And by March of 2020, one of the last in-person medical visits before COVID had us locking things down here, the neurologist who he had seen probably a year ago went to meet with her, and she said, "This is not dementia. This is what I suspect to be Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease." We had a second opinion from Johns Hopkins, and in fact, yes, it's very quick in terms compared to cancers, things like that. From the beginning of onset of symptom to death is usually less than a year. For my dad's case, it was exactly a year, August to August. Yes, in August 2020. And so once we knew that, I came every month. I live for the United States, and so they live in the north where I was raised, and so I would go back to Pennsylvania and visit every month. When he looked like it was really not going well in May, I brought the kids and everybody up to say goodbye. So there were moments where I could just sit with him. I could just process. They used to live, my mom sold the house after his passing, but they used to live on a place that was really beautiful, had a lake, had all kinds of stuff. And so I was able to just walk around every time I was there and just pray and grieve and cry and, think about, what it's going to be like when he's gone. So that real, understanding that this is not dementia, that he is going to die, and it's probably going to be in the next 6 months, which it was really that March to August time frame. And so, in June, when I went, I knew that I wasn't going to be, I knew I wasn't going to see him again. Till he was going to pass before I would see him. Wow. And so, that was a special time too, that I could just sit with him and be with him. So this idea of pre-grieving really, is something that is, grief is what it is. It's very unpredictable, but there are these things that are, these emotional connections of, these moments in time where you see, you feel something. The first thing that I felt was, actually when he passed was kind of this, was all the memories and all the experiences kind of compressed into one, like, hit you in the chest. It was like a big collage that was just all there at once, and so, again, that's just one example of things that, have happened, but it really did. It helped me to appreciate every moment, every day. Even if I wasn't there, I was always thinking, I wonder how my dad's doing. I know he's going to pass. And that thought of his mortality and the end of his timeline, as I like to say, the end of his timeline was very present, for 6 full months. It was very present. So there's no easy way to lose anybay. Even when you have a family member that has suffered for years with something. I've talked with people, and they're like, it was time for him to go, but you still, there's a loss. There's a piece that's gone. So hope that.
Yeah, of course. Now, in contrast, your mother's passing was completely unexpected. Can you take us back to that moment and how it affected you emotionally and spiritually?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So it was just a little over a year ago. So February 16th of 2024, and I got a call. It was Valentine's Day, so 10 days ago, a year ago. It was Valentine's Day, and evening was done. I was in bed, and 2:30 in the morning, so early morning on the 15th, I got a phone call, and it was, my phone was by my bed, and I looked down. I was like, who's calling me? And it was a hospital. I thought, what is going on? Like, I thought it was our hospital, like locally, or what was going on? So I picked up, and it was a doctor, and he said, is this Dave Broussard? I said, it is. She said, well, this is so-and-so, and I'm here at, Wellspan Hospital up here in Lebanon, and your mom has been brought in an ambulance with a very serious heart attack. And this already was like a shock. Never saw a cardiologist, never, had any discussion about her heart health. And she was not one to avoid doctors. Like, she had a rheumatologist, she had a dentist, she had like all these things, and never had a cardiologist. So already I was like, are you sure you have the right number? Like, I knew it, but I was like, okay. And he's like, I'm going to have to get in there and see, how bad the damage is, like what's going on, what we can do for her. I'll call you back in 2 hours. Okay. So I didn't sleep. I'm just awake, sitting there thinking, praying, going like, okay, Lord, like, what is going to happen? And he called back. He said, listen, your mom's main artery is 95% clogged, which that's what they call the widowmaker, right? That's, most people, if they have a heart attack, they're going to die. I think it's like some crazy, like 15% chance if you're out of the hospital, 25% chance if you're in a hospital, like ready to be treated. That's the survival rate. And so he said, that's 95% blocked. He said, look, I can't put a stent in. I can't figure out anything. The only thing that's going to work is a bypass surgery, so I'm not the surgeon, but I'm going to tell you that they're going to call you tomorrow morning and go over the details with you. And so I woke up the next morning. Actually, my mom called me before. She's like, I'm in the hospital. I said, I know, they called me. And she was talking to me, and she was, she's like, well, I've got can't even remember her name, like one of her friends who was a nurse that was there with her. So I was like, okay. And so then maybe half an hour later, they called and we talked over the options, which were, they had two options. Option one is that, and they said it like this, they said, some people don't want to undergo surgery and they think they've had a good life. And so we would discharge you. And basically that meant that she would probably not even get out of the hospital and die.
Yeah.
Because her heart wasn't, I mean, it's all coming back to me actually, even just a year later. I didn't even realize like half the things that were going on. I actually didn't even realize it, which I understood later, speaking with a counselor that, it's very much a trauma situation where you don't understand what's going on. You block out like so many things, like you're just in complete survival mode. And what happens in PTSD is you start to remember some of these things. And so, just recently reflecting on the year anniversary, there were some things that I realized. Anyway, one of those things was that, she was in the CVICU, cardiovascular ICU, and the machines they had on her, I didn't even pay attention to, but I realized in retrospect that they were actually pumping the blood for her mostly. They were helping her heart to beat. So if they took her off those machines, like she'd be gone. And she knew that. I didn't know it on the call, but of course, it's like we knew that she was going to die like quickly, if not immediately. And she said the second option is surgery, and you have a 4%, mortality rate with they do all these calculations. And I was like, okay, well, it's either live or die, right? Like have a chance at life or die. So we did the surgery. I flew in, I got to see her. I often, this is one thing I always, a lot of people say they don't like hospitals. I really liked hospitals. I worked for a healthcare system for 9 years, and our family has always put a lot of trust in the medical field. And my great grandfather was a physician, and my father-in-law is a physician. So, I was very at peace. I was like, okay, we're just, going to go in, it's going to be the surgery, and, yeah, it's major surgery, but again, in retrospect, I kind of realized that that her pastor said something at her funeral that I only caught like a few days ago because I couldn't watch the full funeral until about, a year after. And he said something about like because he came right away and prayed with her and stuff. And he said, she told me, I hope I make it. And I thought, she probably knew a lot. She had a much clearer understanding of the gravity of the situation than I did. So interestingly, and part of that, I thought it was just nuts, but I really see God in it. I was on the plane coming there, and I'd recently gone through just some exercises of forgiveness for her, and I was just thinking about that. I was thinking about her. I was just thinking about going back to Pennsylvania, and I really felt God speak to me. He said, you did that because she's not going to be with you. And I thought I'm just being crazy, but it's true. Like I really knew, I know the voice of the Lord, and that, he definitely said that. And there was a strong, that was like the beginning of preparation and walking with me through this entire thing. But, he knew what was going to happen. Everybody else knew the gravity of the situation. It was Dave Broussard who, when there are highly emotional, hard situations, kind of seeks refuge in logic, refuge in his own mind, avoidance. I've always done that. That's actually one of the things that I realized even more intensely during this last year of how I've short-circuited some of that, just because of pain, and being, anyway. So yeah, I went in, the surgery was set for that next morning. I went in, and they were wheeling, I just spent some time with her. We didn't really say too much. And, I said, well, I guess I'll, see. I don't even know if I said I'll see you when you get out. I just, that we all got up because the nurses came to wheel her out. And she turned and she said, goodbye, Dave. And they all freaked out because you're not supposed to say that, right? I said, don't say that, don't say that. And I told her, but it was actually prophetic. I mean, and I told her, I said, Mom, don't worry. I said, now is the easy part. You just go to sleep. And I mean, you just see all the stuff that happens when you do that anyway. So I went out and, it's a small town. The social worker, they call her, that's really like a patient liaison, I had graduated with, so I already knew her. And so she came out. I said, "Oh, hey, Lisa," so we had a good time catching up and learned she was, looking for a house, just banter. And every hour, basically 8 o'clock, 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, she would call and she'd say, "Hey, everything's going well. She's under, she's this and she's that." And everything was great. She was starting to talk to me about like what rehab could look like because I was up there to help my mom with rehab. That's why I went. I went to lunch and they called me and said, "Hey, your mom's ready. Her surgery's done. She's going to be moved to recovery. And so you can, come up to the floor and everything." So she lives close by. I got in the car, went over, and when I got there, Lisa was waiting for me and she said, "Hey, listen," she said, "I don't really know. I don't know what's happened, but they were on your mom was on her way up here and they had to take her back into the operating room and open her up again." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "No, I want you to know that's serious. Like, that's not normal. Like, that's a serious thing." I was still not, I guess I was I started to process it at that point, like something's wrong. And so I called my wife and, I was obviously on the verge of tears. And then I turned around and the surgeon and and Elisa came up and I said, "Oh, I get two of you." And he just looked at me. He's like, "This is not good news." And so I sat down. He started to tell me all these things about how my mom's heart, went into atrial fibrillation and couldn't start again. They closed her up, it was fine. But then when they moved her to the bed, like it went, and she said, we tried everything we could. And, we had to open her back up, do the paddles, the mini little paddles in the chest cavity. And right now she's on a heart-lung machine that's helping her to breathe and pump her blood. So she has a do not resuscitate. What do you want us to do? Woo! Okay. So I said, I didn't understand anything you said. Can I please take notes now? And so he had to repeat it to me because I was not processing it. Like my heart was stopped. I was just like, this isn't happening. This can't happen. Like, this wasn't supposed to happen. Like, we need to stop everything. We need to rewind it. Like, can we just go back? I wanted to go back in time so much, and time kept going and I couldn't stop it. And so it was like, okay. So I said, well, what if they can't keep her on the heart-lung machine forever. They have to, put her on what's called a ECMO machine or an Impala, which is basically the full-on life support. And I said, well, how long would you know until she's better? And they said, well, it's probably going to be a couple of days. I said, well, let's do it. And so he left. Probably 10 minutes later, he came back. He said, "Listen, in the time we talked, your mom's body is shutting down. Her capillaries are starting to explode. Her liver's failed, or her kidney or something. Her brain is swelling. Like, there's nothing we could do. We can't even pump blood through her now because like all her veins have collapsed." And so I will tell you though that it is, and this was just 2 days ago, I realized it. God saved me from probably the worst decision I could have made to try to keep her alive, because the doctor was trying to tell me, but they can't. It's like, if you keep her alive for they say quality of life is not going to be whatever. Yeah. Basically, she would be wishing for death every day, had she been alive. And God in his mercy took her, because it would have been, and I would have regretted that decision for the rest of my life. I can just tell you. And God in his mercy, I was just this whole weekend was just full of thanksgiving, saying, God, even when I don't even know what's going on, like, you are before me, you are going before me, you are preparing the way and protecting me. And, it doesn't feel like that. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that. But, and sometimes even when like this stuff has, like, your mom died, like, how is God protecting you? It's like, believe me, he is, because there are things worse than death. And it's being alive and not being able to die. And this is one of the things that we talked about, her not wanting. She didn't want to be an invalid. She didn't want to lose her mind. She didn't. So I said, I don't know. What do we do? And at that point, I don't know, okay, well, she's like, well, we'll bring her up and you can sit with her body. And so I was waiting for her in the hall, and Lisa's like, "You're getting pale." I'm like, "I don't even feel well." And I never have a physical reaction to this stuff, but I had to sit down and it was just so unbelievable. It was just so unbelievable. And I sat with her body. They brought her in. The whole CBICU floor was just quiet. Nobody had seen it. I said to Lisa, I said, "Well, you must deal with this a lot." She said, "I've worked here 15 years. This is the third time I've had to deal with this." And so everybody was floored. I mean, I was shocked. They were shocked. The surgeon was crying. He came to me to shake my hand. I was just, I said, "Thanks for doing all you could," and he just couldn't believe it. In fact, later I went back, for a few months later, and I said, "Lisa, I want to thank you for what you did." And we sat together for a while, and she said, that doctor, can't remember his name, but he said, he went around and hugged every person that worked on your mom, and I've never seen him do that. It was so shaking, even as cardiac surgeon. By the way, this guy, he's on commercials on TV. Like, this is all he does is bypass surgery. He's like the expert, right? And I don't know if he ever lost a patient. I mean, he must have, but this just floored him, Lisa told me. So I sat there with her, and the only thing I could say was, "I'm sorry, that she didn't make it." But I didn't know what else to do, So I got up, walked out, and Lisa gave me a hug, and I just walked out of the hospital. Sorry. And okay, well, I guess I go home.
Yeah.
But I walked out, and I shared later. I said, all my security and thoughts about loving hospitals and it's all going to work out. Like, all those thoughts, like all those expectations, they just disappeared. They just dissolved into, just like behind me as I left the hospital. So I went home, and, that was hard. But, the hardest part was getting all these texts from people. "How's Margaret? How did the surgery go?" And I had to tell them, like, "She didn't make it. She didn't make it." Again and again and again, you have to, like, it's like an hour, after she's gone. And I'm just, it's just, there's a lot more detail, but suffice to say, like, it just, kills you. I told people, I said, this has been the worst year of my life, and it's not an exaggeration. A lot of times, people say that, but it really is. I know that your previous guest talked about, the power of words. Your brain really, doesn't distinguish between reality and hypothesis when the words are spoken. Yeah. And so I weighed that very carefully, but it was also because it was so true, I had to speak it. It wasn't a hypothesis. It was real. Yeah. It just happened. And, it just, it was jarring. It was, I mean, I didn't even know what to do. I just sat there for like 3 days. I mean, I had to remind myself to eat. Like, I think I left. Yeah. I finally told my wife, we were talking but I said, "You got to come here, because I don't know if I can leave. Like, I'm paralyzed. Like, I'm not functional. Like, you got to fly here. You got to get in a plane and fly here and take me home. Like, I can't make it."
Now, your body physically shut down from the grief, something that people don't realize can actually happen. So what were some of the signs, and how did you start the journey of healing?
Yeah, so I think, everybody goes through it a little differently, but so, those initial shocking moments, like, I had to just, remember to remind myself to eat. And once I got back, one of the things that I mentioned earlier about my tendency to kind of avoid, painful situations kicked in. Yeah. And so I was very busy. My mom's estate was closed in record time. I was an administrative whirlwind, just, doing all the things and working it. And, and I sold her house in May. I went back to France for a board meeting in June, and then, I still would hurt. Right. And so, I felt like I was processing things, and, I was in a way. But in September So September, I had another trip scheduled to go to France for Impact France. And I had two parts to that trip. The first part was in Toulouse, and the next part was in Paris. And so second, I think I was scheduled to leave on Tuesday, and Sunday after church, I was walking around the town because this is where I came to Christ. And before I left the hotel, I was just praying. I just felt like God said, you need to grieve. I said, grieve what? I mean, and I was thinking I was already grieving my mom, but you need to grieve. And part of it was grieving kind of some of the things that I had allowed to just remain in my what if mind related to news. And what if I had stayed there? And what if we had had a life here? And what if this had happened? What if that happened? And God was like, it's time for you to kill this. You need to let this die and grieve it because you've hung on to this, but that's not my plan. And you're, by holding on to this, you're basically saying, I have something that is better than your plan that I want to go to. And so that was that. But I also think that he said that because there were some other things that were about to happen that he, of course, knows. So I got on the train when I was headed up to Paris. And as I got off the train, I started having like a lot of vertigo, like everything was spinning, and I started sweating like a lot. And I was like, I'm never going to make it off the platform, and I'm going, and I got some kind of like, drink, like some sweet tea drink. And I drank it and thinking it's like sugar thing, nothing. I walked down to the metro place to get on the train and go to the hotel. And I couldn't go. I was like, I can't. I had to sit there, and it just got getting worse. I'm like, oh my gosh, like what is happening to me? And so I walked into a store and I said, hey, I need some help. I don't know if you have a medical place around here. And they're like, yeah, hold on. So they called the what's called les pompiers, the EMTs, emergency medical technicians of the train station. And they came and they evaluated me they were evaluating me. I threw up, I was like, not well. And so they're like, are you okay to go to the hospital? I said, yeah, if I have to go to the hospital, I'll go to the hospital. So they called the hospital. The hospital came with the ambulance, got a wheelchair. I'm being wheeled through, Montparnasse with all these people. I called my wife, who of course is just beside herself, and we're waiting. And basically the ER, in a public hospital, they were like, hey, listen, you're not going to die, so get a blood test and like figure it out, which is okay. I mean, I didn't know what was going on, right? But as I was going through this, I realized that this had actually happened before, because as I calmed down and as I my vertigo left and as the sweating depleted and as I stabilized, I thought, this is a weird sensation. Wait a second. I looked 3 weeks to the day. I'd had the same thing happen to me here in my bedroom, where I woke up in the middle of the night, vertigo. I struggled to they threw up and was chilled, shaking, everything. And I went back to bed, and it was over. And I thought I had food poisoning or something. What I realized is that my body was saying, I can't take it anymore, and you need to change. So obviously I talked to my GP here. I talked to my wife, but I said, look, I'm going to get the blood tests. If there's anything really wrong, then I don't want to get on a plane. I'll stay here and go back to the hospital. But if there's nothing wrong, then I'm going to come right home. And there wasn't anything wrong. I came right home and basically went to the GP. And there was nothing that was a disease making me have these symptoms, but stress does. And in fact, many of all the articles and the people that I've talked to, the doctors, they've all said, stress is a trigger. That really caused me to stop and say, I'm 50. I've just had this, major, very surprising physical attack, and there is way too much on me. And I'm not even getting into the other stuff with work or Impact France or anything else. But there was just a lot on me that I couldn't handle, because the pillars of my foundation had either disappeared or they'd been weakened or changed when my mom died, which, last parent dying too, and that was the physical, we talked about the body, the physical wall that I hit was in September, and I really took October, November, to just do a full 360 and be just brutally honest, with myself and say, what do I need to just give up, God? You tell me, what your plan is for me. And you see what's just happened. What do I need to do? I'm starting fresh and just saying, I'm not going to do anything unless, you tell me to do it. And I'm going to give up anything you tell me to give up.
Sure. Now, many people wrestle with anger towards God when they lose someone. Did you ever struggle with that, or was your faith in him unshaken throughout all of that?
It's so interesting. It was really unshaken, and I had no anger ever. In fact, it was only gratitude and thank you, Lord, and just this was her time. You saved her from all the terrible things she never wanted to go through. The trauma, you have been with me, speaking to me from day one on the plane to today, and showing me things and giving me comfort. And it's ironic because I had in 2013 and 2012, I had the exact opposite happen to me. I was burnt out and some things, but I thought God had abandoned me, and I was furious with him for, probably a good 3 to 4 months. And it took me probably another 4 years to actually come back to have a solid, just stable relationship with God. And really only in 2022 was a renewed one. So we're talking almost 10 years of just not completely desert. I don't want to say it like that, but just a disruption in the force, if you will.
Yeah.
And this is completely opposite, which I wonder about, God's plan in that. It's like, this was something that was in 2013 was very minor. If you look at it very objectively, it was not something that was a big loss. It wasn't anything. It was actually, candidly, me just being a little bit of a, narcissistic ego guy. Like, well, why can't I have this? Or what? Yeah. Why didn't this? But I felt so, justified and betrayed. So, that it set me on this course that I really had to rediscover, what do I really believe about God, and what am I really acting on? Like, how am I living that belief? And then in 2022, he brought me back to Toulouse, the exact place where I came to him. And I hadn't been there in a while. And I can't go into that story, but basically I was born again. I really felt comforted by God. I know that a lot of people don't, but I can say in that sense, I've been in that case too, even if it wasn't a big loss like this. And I felt like it's so weird for me to say, like, God is faithful throughout everything, because you're not, because I never thought I'd say that back in 2013 or 14.
Right.
But this time it was like a tsunami of love. I felt completely taken care of. Like, God had gone before me on every step of the way. And it was just, I was hurting. And I was definitely frustrated at sometimes, like when I had these dizzy spells still, and like I was just lying in bed, like, why is this, had my wife come and just, be like, I just hate this, and there are so many things that it's like I wanted to vomit out, and just get it out of my system and just, get rid of it and just go past it and be over with this season for the past year so many times. But I could always kind of come back to the Lord and just say, he's there, he's speaking to me, he's with me.
That contrast between, the first time where you did feel like he had abandoned you, and now, after having gone through this whole ordeal, really is a testament and a reflection to your intentionality to draw close to him and get to know who he is, and who you are in him, for you to be able to sit here today and go, he has been faithful through it all.
Yeah. I would even just say that yeah, I was open to it. I was, but I mean, really in 2022, when he brought me back to my first love and just said, I've chosen you, I've called you,
Yeah.
I love you. And, it was, he did that. Like I
Yeah.
couldn't have orchestrated what happened during that trip. So, not to be weird about it. I mean, he gets the glory on this,
Yeah. Come on.
I could not be faithful were he not faithful, for sure. So,
Wow.
yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit about faith and purpose in the midst of grief. Now, 1 year before your mother's passing, you felt God ask you, will you accept the mantle I am giving you? How did that moment prepare you for the season ahead?
Wow. Yeah. So just like you said, I looked back and I rarely put dates in my journaling when I do it, but this time I did. And I even had to Google like, how many days is between this date and this date? And it was exactly 365 days between when I had that conversation with God and when my mom died. It was a very serious question from God, even to the point where I felt like he was saying, if you say no, I still love you and have an amazing plan for you, but I want to give you this mantle if you want it. And I took a week, I said yes. And it really marked me because I felt like, okay, and then throughout even 2023, I felt like this is a preparation. Like I'm being prepared. I'm keeping my antenna up, my eyes open for, what this could mean. What does this mantle mean? And so, when my mom passed and then the subsequent, months and everything, I kind of forgotten about it right up until that moment where the physical part hit and I started looking through everything and I said, okay, I want to give up. And this was like, I was going to church. I never forget it. And I was driving back. It was October because I had taken a month off from Impact France. And I was just thinking about like, what am I going to do when I get back and start working at it again? And I couldn't think of anything because everybody that's on the team was doing everything. Felt like I was doing nothing. And so I got to church and I was just praying and, during worship and felt like, God said, there's one more thing for you to grieve, bringing back that conversation. And you know what it is. You need to let Impact France go. And I was like, with joy. Yes. Yes. I mean, God had prepared me probably for that, but not probably. He had prepared me for that moment, over the years, but that was the time. It was the time. And I talked to my wife about it and I said, I feel like God's saying, resign from Impact France. And she said, what are you going to do? And immediately the mantle thought came again. I said, I know exactly what I'm going to do. And I didn't even plan that. I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just thinking about, the loss and grieving and letting it go. And I just proceeded to tell her like, yeah, I think this is what's going to happen. She's like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense a lot. Talked to my pastor about it, executive coach, all the people, and then the board and, the team and everything. And everybody kind of said the same thing. It's like, we're surprised, but we're not surprised.
Yeah.
At some point, the founder lets go to let the organization fly.
Come on.
I am so ready to do that and let you guys take it and run with it because already for the past few months, they were coming up with ideas that I never would come up with. They were coming up with things. I was like, man, that's amazing. And I felt like the dummy, okay, I'll just, stumble along, old guy Dave, trying to figure it out, get off my lawn, you kids. And what's this internet? And, I felt like that, I don't even know what's going on anymore. I thought, well, this is time. But then when I talk about badly resource discovery, all of a sudden the same fire that I had when I started Impact France was all of a sudden I tapped into that again. I thought, this is it. I knew it then, and now I really knew. So I resigned. I'm still president of the board for continuity, but they also, because one of the questions was that we wrestled with, and it was so beautiful because like I'd say to the team, okay, I feel like the Lord's saying I need to resign. And everybody's like, and then like, we're like, what do we do? It's like, okay, we don't know anything except the next step to talk to the board. And then we talk to the board and we just have nothing would be clear except one thing, like the next step, and then the next step.
Wow.
And one of the things that was unclear was how are you going to do this new facet of ministry related to receiving well from God apart from Impact France? And I said, I don't know. I don't have the answer, right? Let's just keep praying. Let's just keep thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
And this idea of continuity and continued involvement and connection to Impact France, but resigning the role of CEO fit. And it also gave me access to all the ministry partners in a way that they were minded. We had talked about doing it like this. And so I thought, well, this is a great fit, So yeah, I'll stay president of the board, right? So nobody gets freaked out like the founder leaves mysteriously and disappears forever. And what's going on there? It's like, no, he's, transitioned the operational leadership, the executive director role to 2 co-directors, and just going to be working on things with our partners to develop more materials, courses, understanding around this idea of receiving well from God.
I love that. I feel like you've partly answered my next question, because I wanted to ask you, how has this journey of grief deepened your understanding of God's timing and purpose? And it's evident. I mean,
yeah, it's one of the things with his timing and his purpose is what in my life that I found is it's very difficult to predict. I feel very blessed because a lot of people kind of are seeking for their calling. And I feel like I've never had to seek for my calling. Like it's always been
clear,
obvious. Yeah. Completely obvious, that there's a spiritual DNA connection between me and France because that's where I was born the second time, and it's a real thing, it's a real thing, and so I've never had that really called into question, but what's made it come into focus so much clearer, almost like abandoning the desire for purpose and replacing that with a desire for obedience and just listening for God, whatever he says.
Yeah.
Our pastor, he's funny. He says, just listen, ask, listen for God, what God wants you to do, and then just do that.
Just do that.
It's like, just do that part. And it's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That basically sums it up. Yeah.
It sums it up, right?
If someone listening right now is struggling with trusting God in their grief, what's one thing you would like to encourage them to hold on to?
Wow, that's a really good question. Well, I'd say the first thing is that searing pain is 100% legit. It's valid. It will take any form it wants to that person, and that does not negate anything that I'm about to say, but it is also something that will subside. It's not so much losing somebody as much as how we feel about it. Yeah. It's, if we, we lose people every day, but I'm not grieving somebody that, my neighbor died. I went to his funeral the day my mom died. On the 16th, he died. And I went to the funeral. It was very cathartic because I think it was God. It was amazing. That's a whole other story. It was amazing how it even happened. But I'm not grieving him as I grieve my mom. So we know people are lost all the time, and that we grieve. But the problem with grief is the pain that it causes. That's what is the blockage. That's the hard part to reconcile. Good and bad are not on the same playing field as pain and comfort. Wow. So you can have something that's really painful and also really good for you. One of the key things that a counselor told me back when I was going through the 2013 one is he said, Dave, perfect love casts out fear. And sometimes God allows us, and even sometimes, plans it out in a way that our fears will be triggered so they expose themselves. And when we bring it to the light of Christ, he heals us. And so it's like, bring all your pain and ugliness and hurt to the surface to allow God's light to shine on it. And what was really hard for me in that time was I couldn't find the light of God. I didn't know how to connect with that. Community was something I lacked. I didn't have community around me, or even really a good pastor at that point. But those people that were, seeking out community, healthy community, can really help to remind you of God's love and show you things in a different way.
So good.
So those
good,
are just
David.
random thoughts anyway.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that.
What's one thing you wish others had understood about your grieving process? How can we better support those who are mourning?
Yeah, it's so funny you said that, because my wife's in France right now, and she just left me a WhatsApp message, and I found it incredibly, it was surprising, because, I was talking to her about some of the things that I had realized how merciful God was to let my mom pass, even despite my decision to want her to keep her alive on machines. And she said, the kids have also really been experiencing that, some grief, and they talked to me about it. I was like, what? Like, I didn't know that. Like, and I responded to her. I said, I would love to hear that. When people are going through grief, sharing, not to try to say, oh, I know how it is, but just saying, like, sharing personal experiences or anything that is relevant, and say, I know it's not, what you're going through, but, I would love to be there for you. And, if you need, I think sometimes for me, it depends on the person, but I'm a verbal processor. So if, I say, like, hey, if you need to talk sometime, like, yeah, I do. All the time.
Yes.
So I think just not being afraid to say the wrong thing.
Yes, that's good. That's really good advice. As you move forward, how has the loss of your parents given you a deeper perspective on your calling and legacy?
Man, legacy, that's a big one. Yeah, no, it has. Well, I think one thing is, if I, died tomorrow, I think Impact France is just a huge blessing for me to count as part of something I could be involved with.
Yeah.
But I've also thought about, it's called a knock box, the next of kin box. And so I have all this stuff over there that's like prepared. I thought about doing videos for my kids. In fact, I will tell you that as we were praying before this, I really felt like if this is still around, my kids will probably find it when I'm gone.
Yeah.
And they'll see it.
Yeah.
And that'll be really awesome.
Yeah.
So whatever, the things that we have now, video and all the things that, really weren't available when other people passed and in generations before, they just had writings, and, we can really give, I think, our kids, this is what I think about is, what do I give them when I'm gone? And, all the stuff might, be there, might not be there, who knows? But, at least I can, share my heart with them, while I'm still alive.
Yeah.
And then also record things, like record, podcasts, or record things that are what I want to say to them while I'm still here,
Yeah. Okay, so I wasn't going to ask you this, but I am now. So to David, the man who is not going to be around forever, what do you want to say to your kids right now?
Oh my gosh, love you. You're awesome. Best thing ever happened to me. But also I think, God has an amazing plan. Created you just the way that he needed you to be, for what he has for you. And the biggest fulfillment, the biggest blessing, the biggest good thing I could give to them is for them to know their creator and know the fullness of life. Jesus said, I came to have so you have life and have it more abundantly. But it's not just more abundantly, like it's the full, right? Like it's, tipped, right? There's no other measure after that. And I just think that, seeing, having my kids go know Jesus and know him intimately and deeply is probably the best thing. But first, I love him,
Yeah.
They're awesome people. They're just, I mean, they're the best kids. I mean, both of them. Sammy has a heart of gold. He's super empathetic. Just really, I mean, Elsa's amazingly passionate. She was at a demonstration today.
Wow.
But because she's passionate, she's an activist. She's
Come
like,
on.
"I got after it," And so those are great things. Those are awesome things. Those are things that God has put in them, and I would love them to see them like that for that.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh, David, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. How can I say no to you? You're fun and happy.
Friends, grief is deeply personal, but you don't have to navigate it alone. If today's episode resonated with you, then here are 3 things that you can do right now. Number 1, seek support. No matter where you are in your faith journey, seeking professional help is a sign of strength, not weakness. I firmly believe in the skills of counselors and psychologists. When my family and I walked through a horrific season and I was diagnosed with PTSD, someone told me that I was backsliding in my faith for seeking help. Let me be clear, that is nonsense. God has gifted people with the wisdom and skills to help us navigate life's hardest seasons, so don't let religion or culture keep you from getting the support you need, okay? And number 2, find strength in Scripture. David shared how faith was his anchor. If you're struggling, let Psalms 34 verse 18 be a reminder to you. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, so hold on to his promises even when the pain feels overwhelming. And thirdly, reach out to those in your world who might be grieving. Don't underestimate the power of simply being there, and David ratified that today. You don't need the perfect words, just your presence can be a source of comfort. If you found value in this conversation, then share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Your support helps bring these powerful conversations to more people. Till next time, I love you. God bless.
Thank you for listening to the Under the Rug podcast with Nalini Tranquim. For more information, please visit nalinitranquim.com or email us at info@nalinitranquim.com.